to the Macworld Podcast. I'm Roman Loyola, here with Karen Haslam.
Hello.
And David Price.
Hello.
This episode is all about Macworld reader and listener hot takes. You have thoughts, and we're going to share and respond to what you wrote. All the comments mentioned in the show can be seen in the show notes for this podcast on macworld.com. And before we get started, I'd like to apologize ahead of time for completely butchering the commenter handles and reader names. Let's get started. For listeners who don't know, David writes the Apple Breakfast column for Macworld. You also write Think Different, correct, David?
It's different. It's different.
Or is it different thing?
Different thing, yeah.
Different thing. All right.
Really clever pun.
Right. It's a play on the Apple.
Hours to come up with that.
Well, anyways, he writes those columns. The second half of the Apple Breakfast column rounds up the news from the prior week. Usually posts on a Monday. But the first half of the column, David offers some thoughts on a topic. They're hot takes, if you will. They often generate responses from readers. So many of the hot takes on today's show are responses to David's column. So, for example, David wrote a column recently titled, Apple Vision is a flop, just like the iPod. And that got one response from Lucas376. Let me correct that. Lucas3746. See, I already butchered a name. It's only the first one. That was on X. They posted, clearly you don't know what you're talking about. By all accounts, the Apple Vision Pro is a success and will be in the future. The Mac, iPhone, iPad, AirPods, Apple Watch, and more were all called failures. And Relative Media posted, the difference is that the market is already flooded with VR, AR headsets for way cheaper. Also of note, it's a super niche market. Everyone listens to music, but not everyone cares to play with VR. And at the end of the day, that's what it is, a toy, just like the iPad.
I sort of think that maybe the guy hadn't read the article because...
That's why I brought up these two comments, because this is clearly an example of people reading the headline and not actually understanding the headline.
Yeah.
Because if you read the headline and you thought about it, you would go, oh, wait a minute, I see what he's doing there.
The whole point of the column is that the iPod is one of Apple's all-time most iconic and successful products. And they read this headline and they were thinking, oh yeah, that famous flop, the iPod, nobody heard about that ever again. Yeah, the point is the Vision Pro has not sold a lot of units, but it's too early to say. That's exactly the point I was making. I'm not sure I totally agree with this person's other examples, because I mean, my memory is a bit hazy, but I thought the iPhone was recognized as a success almost immediately. I'm sure the iPad was immediately a successful product. I think it sold quicker than the iPhone had in its sort of first year or so. It was only later it tailed off, and I think these days we'd say that the iPad is in the doldrums. But the other ones, yeah, I mean, they start as one thing and you don't know what they're going to become. The Apple Watch particularly is a good example. It had to find its audience and it took a couple of generations. And I think that could be the case with Vision Pro, as was the case with the iPod. Both the iPod and the iPad and the iPhone, all these things were successful products, and that was the point I was making.
Yeah.
It's interesting that one of those comments draws the comparison of the Vision Pro and says, there's a lot of competition and cheaper devices out there. Well, that's exactly what everyone said about the iPod when it launched. The point is that when the iPod launched, there were 1 million MP3 players on the market, all at a much lower price. And everyone was like, why do we want to spend $350, pounds, whatever, on an MP3 player when we can get one for 20 quid, Also, I don't think there were really cheap VR headsets on the market, not in the same kind of way that there were MP3 players.
I mean, compared to Vision Pro, they're cheap. I suppose that is true that they are comparatively cheap. The issue for me really is that at the moment we think of augmented reality as a niche, and it is a niche, it is a toy at the moment, but we don't know where the market's going. That was what I was trying to get across. Is at some point, at the moment, the smartphone is indisputably the leading computing platform, but that's not always going to be the case. And everybody's trying to work out what's going to come after the smartphone. And one of the possibilities is headsets, is VR, AR headsets. It could be like smartwatches. It could be more wearables in a more discrete form than huge headsets. I'm not completely convinced, but it's one of the options. It's one of the possibilities. And Apple has to be there. It's depended so much on the iPhone. It has to find whatever's going to come after the smartphone and get into that arena. And Vision Pro is one of its irons in the fire. It could be.
It was that the Apple Watch was like joining a market, that was going to become a bigger. Taking some of those features of the iPhone, putting them on your wrist, minimizing everything. And we're going to get a bit onto like making things smaller. That's obviously where things are going, whether it's going to be a headset, given that we all wear glasses, but the idea of minimalisation of all these technologies so that we can carry them around, just have them embedded somewhere.
Yeah. I think when it comes to successes, there's a little bit of revisionist history when it comes to the iPhone, because it was a success, but it didn't really take off until the App Store happened. And that was what? The third, fourth generation of the iPhone? I can't remember exactly when, but it wasn't until the App Store came where the iPhone really took off, because you could get third-party apps. And the Vision Pro needs some sort of similar kind of thing happen to it, where there has to be this one thing that the Vision Pro does that everybody will have to absolutely need to get. I'm not sure what that is yet. I don't know I don't even know if Apple knows what it is yet.
No, but Apple didn't know that with the Apple Watch either. It took a couple of generations,
right,
before, like, essentially, and this goes totally against the Steve Jobs thing about showing people what they want before they know. It was Apple Watch users that essentially told Apple what they wanted from the Apple Watch. They were ignoring all of this nonsense with sending each other heartbeats and little doodles, and they didn't care about any of that. And they said, what we want is a fitness companion. And Apple leaned into that. It's like at the early days of Twitter, when people would come up with features themselves, like retweets and stuff. That Twitter didn't invent any of that stuff. That was users entirely, and the company leaned into it and said, okay, we'll take that on board and take the product in the direction people are using it. The problem with Vision Pro is that there's so few users at the moment; it's quite hard to get that feedback. But I think it will. I think it will find its place. And the other important point we have to say is that, like the Apple Watch, Apple changes the momentum of the industry simply by being in it. Smartwatches. I don't think anybody was sure what was going to happen with smartwatches. They did seem a bit pointless at the time, I remember. And now that there is the Apple Watch as this flag bearer for the whole industry, it's pushed it along. I don't know if that is what's going to come after smartphones, but Apple has given it a chance with its own presence, that sort of bullying presence, that it can push things along simply by being there.
David and Karen are based in the UK, and Apple recently announced that the Vision Pro will be available outside of the US. Is it on sale in the UK now?
It's up for pre-order, but probably by the time this goes out, it will be on sale, because I think it's
okay.
I know that there have been cases where they've used it in hospitals. They've already used the Vision Pro headset during operations and stuff like that. So it's one of those, like we say, it's a niche product. At the moment, it's probably owned by people who've got more money than sense, and people who are using it for like applications like healthcare and stuff. A little bit like, how the iPad's more than just something that kids use to watch YouTube on. It's used in hospitals and building sites and stuff like that. So perhaps there's something that we as typical users don't see as being a potential for the Vision Pro. Maybe it's something that could have different uses that wouldn't really apply to us. The thing I'm sort of thinking though is, the Apple Watch came about, we already used to wear watches on our wrists. The iPhone came about, we already used to use phones. The headset, it's like we all have glasses, but people, it's not something that you're already using that's already a part of your life, unless, the Vision Pro evolves into something more like glasses. It's not, something that we're that supplements something we already use. So it's kind of introducing a completely new category and then expecting people to it's hard to sell something that you've never had before. People understand what a watch is. People understand what a phone
really
is.
Good point. Yeah. I would say before the smartphone, there was that period of about 10 years when the mobile phone, the precursor, went from hardly anyone has it, and if they do, you're suspicious of them, to pretty much everyone has it, and it was so rapid, and it did manage to become something you carried around, and if they can do that with the smartphone, with the mobile phone, there is a hope for headsets. But I think you're right. It has to be closer to glasses, because at the moment it's ludicrously big and ludicrously bulky, and I can't see it integrating into society the way it is at the moment. All we can do is sort of cross our fingers and say it must change in some way.
I know there've been photographs of people using them on trains and things like that, but I wouldn't feel safe. And so why would you put a headset on at home when you've got a big TV screen instead? What's it going to give you that you can't have already? What are the things like the mobile phone? The mobile phone, you used it as a phone. The iPhone comes out and suddenly you've got a computer in your pocket. Your watch, you could tell the time. The Apple Watch comes out, you can do more than tell the time. You can't always tell the time on it, but you can check your health. You can manage. You can work out how far you've walked. That sort of thing. It's like it's adding on to something that people already use. That's already a part of their life. But all of these things that we already have, why would we want to put them in a mask over our face? I just don't get it. But
it's a bigger step. It's a bigger step than any previous technology that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Well, since I live in San Francisco and within vicinity of Silicon Valley, I have actually seen people walking around with Vision Pro headsets. It's only happened a couple times. I saw one person on BART. They looked ridiculous. And I saw another person sitting at a Starbucks with someone else. They may have actually been at that instance. They may have been been making a YouTube video or something. I don't know, but it got the same response that you guys probably actually in the UK don't have this, but it elicits the same response from people as seeing the Cybertruck on streets.
I've never seen one.
The Cybertruck, yeah. The Cybertruck here in the Bay Area is everywhere, and it's ridiculous looking. And you gawk at it, and you go, a lot of people are at first entertained by seeing it because it's this big, it's a monolithic thing. And same thing with seeing somebody with the Vision Pro. You're kind of like, what is that person doing? What is that thing on their face? Mm-hmm. And your people are reacting, and they're kind of in awe of the technology. It looks so absurd. So yeah, it's going to be a few generations before I think it can reach mass production and mass scale, because that technology is going to take a little while to develop to reach the potential of everyday wear, and it doesn't seem ridiculous on your face.
And yet, isn't there that rumor that they're toning down development of the new generation of the Vision Pro and focusing on the non-Pro version of it? And
yes,
can they really reduce the cost enough and still get the technology inside?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they can do. I mean, maybe society will get to a point where they'll see something that's obviously not just a regular pair of glasses. Kind of like the Google Glass thing. Everybody knew it was Google Glass. People were uncomfortable with people wearing Vision Glass or Google Glass around. People didn't like it. So
They called them
I
glass.
don't know if the same thing will happen. Right, they call them glass holes. Maybe because Apple is Apple. Maybe the attitude will change towards it.
We're comparing it to the first iPhone, and the better comparator really is that sort of 1980s. The phones that look like a brick, and they would just absurd. That's the stage we're at, and from then, mid 80s or whatever, it took best part of 15 years or so before it became accepted, and it changed completely, almost beyond recognition. So,
well, to take the heat off David a little bit, I recently wrote a piece reacting to the rumors that Apple is working on making a MacBook Pro that's thinner. I say, bring it, Apple. I'd love to see a thinner I'd love to see a thinner MacBook Pro. But Mr. Hummus on X thinks I should just be happy. Mr. Hummus thinks we should just be happy with what we have. Mr. Hummus posted, us MacBook users are spoiled. Whichever model from recent years you have, you should be enjoying your beautiful, powerful, and capable machine, not thinking, darling, why can't you sleep? Because my MacBook Pro is simply not thin enough. And then Camelcraft said, I'd rather have more battery and better thermals. So Apple, I guess, has decided, starting with the iPad Pro, that in search of innovations, being thinner is one of them that they have decided to pursue, it seems like.
It's not just about being thinner, though, is it? It's really about being lighter, surely. It's about your laptop. It used to be the case that if you wanted a workstation, you had to buy a Mac Pro, you had to get something really big and bulky. And now you can get a workstation in your bag. It's not that Apple's sort of dumbing it down or anything to make it slimmer. It's things like the chips have got more energy efficient, the cooling, they don't get as hot, so they don't need that sort of level of cooling anymore. And it's lighter, so you can carry it around.
Right. They're not dumbing down the products. I think that's one thing that needs to be clear. These products aren't being dummied down. But I think, like, my initial response to hearing about a thinner MacBook Pro was, yeah, I'd like to see it. But also, if you could add more battery and keep it as thin or thick as it is now, but add more battery, that to me would be actually better than making it thinner. And I think I thought the same thing of the iPad Pro. I was like, why make it thinner? Why not just add more battery? But I guess adding more battery also adds more cost. I don't know if that's true or not.
It sounds a lot to me, Roman, like you're backing down. You're giving in to the troll. You let them change your mind. Stick to your guns.
I want it both ways. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I want it both ways. I want it thinner, and I want to have the battery last longer. The thing is, the battery does last long enough already.
Yeah.
I want it all.
If you look at the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air, there are trade-offs. To get the Air to be smaller, you lose the fan, so it's not able to be as powerful because you can't sort of boost, run it as fast as you could a MacBook Pro because it will get too hot and everything else, and the battery life and all of those things. It's trade-offs to get it slimmer. And we would have said the MacBook Pro is not ever going to be as slim as the MacBook Air, but then the iPad Pro is now slimmer than the iPad Air, so God knows what Apple's thinking there. But
one of the commenters said they wanted better thermals. I've never had a thermal issue with the current MacBook Pro lineup, so I don't know what that person's doing. I don't know if they're like constantly running 3D applications all the time, or they're writing big apps and compiling code constantly and always have heat issues. I don't know, but I've never experienced thermal issues with the
It
MacBook
is
Pro.
an issue. It's an issue with MacBook Airs, though, isn't it? And I suppose that's the fear, is that if they go smaller with the MacBook Pro, then you're going to have those similar sorts of trade-offs.
Yeah.
But that would be an illogical move for Apple to make, because the Pro has to... You can't... Unless... The only thing that's going to change is if the chips continue to get more energy efficient, if the need for the sort of cooling isn't as sort of drastic as it is right now. Because if you think back 10 years, laptops got really hot because the processors weren't as they are now. So, things do move on. So maybe we can get thinner in the future because the chips will be better.
Well, that's the other thing, is that I think these chips are going to get bigger because of the demands of AI. We're going to need bigger neural engines. We're going to need more RAM. So I think these chips are going to get bigger. So the thermal considerations are going to increase.
Yeah.
Like with the Mac, especially with the MacBook Pro, if the M5, M6, M7, whatever, they might need more fans in the laptop. So I don't know how you can do that with a thinner laptop. I mean, there are new technologies that can help cool your laptop. Like I saw a company, Freur, I can never pronounce the name of the company. They make what they call cooling chips. And they're essentially these kind of SD card sized fans that you can put on devices and in laptops. They actually hacked a MacBook Air and added these fans to it, and they got the MacBook Air to run a little faster. So there are advances happening in thermal cooling that Apple could adopt. And I think that's going to be a bigger issue, especially as AI becomes more and more part of the operating system, because Apple has this commitment to running everything on device, and that's going to be hardware demanding. That's going to require a lot more processing power, bigger chips, more power draw, thermal considerations. So then that thinner MacBook Pro goes out the window. You have to make it thicker now.
That, of course, before when laptops started getting thinner, everyone was complaining about losing ports, losing the CD drive.
Yeah.
And it's like now everything's going wireless, so our need for ports might be less than it was. But obviously at the time, everyone was in a major panic.
I don't think Apple will take away the ports on the MacBook Pro. The thing about the ports on the MacBook Pro, that helps differentiate it from the Air, because the Air only has the 2 Thunderbolt ports and the headphone jack. So
they did.
I don't think
they'll do that, didn't they? And then they bought them back, and everyone was so glad to get like the
right.
Back.
Yeah,
it's
everyone
like,
was so glad.
Hopefully, learned its lesson there.
Yeah,
but
I don't think they'll do that again.
My point was really that in 5 years' time, maybe those kind of card readers and things like that, maybe they won't be something that's important.
True. Right.
This aren't now, But
yeah, because it didn't Mark Gurman report that the next major MacBook Pro redesign is not going to happen for a little while. It's not going to happen till I don't remember what year he said, but it's not happening for a few years. So we've got these designs for a while. Well, let's put the focus back on David, because David hasn't said anything in a little while. So we'll put the heat back on David. Some readers had thoughts on a recent column where he wrote that Apple still has no idea what to do with the iPad. Will Fakes posted, tablets should be tablets. If you want a Mac, buy a Mac. If I buy an iPad, I want it to be an iPad. It's not rocket science. MacFan2410 posted, I believe it is people who want a Mac but think they want an iPad who are the ones that still have no idea what to do with the iPad. I and many others use the iPad for productivity and it works out great. It needs some improvements, but this take is wrong. and Code Lubbers posted, "Wait, who wrote this? I thought the outbreak of drooling fanboy babble has consumed a whole staff at Macworld."
How is that drooling
Well,
fanboy? I'm not being a fanboy. That was the whole point. I was complaining. How is that fanboy? It's unbelievable.
Their point was you weren't being a fanboy. That's what they were saying.
Oh,
They
so that was a compliment. That last one was a compliment.
The last one was like a backhanded compliment.
Oh,
so, yes.
Okay, he was complimenting me, but he was slamming all the rest of you. He was saying,
yes.
Unlike David, who knows his onions, these other people are drooling fanboy. Why did you put that one in?
Yeah.
All right, it's hard to answer all of these. They're all slamming me in different ways. So the point I was trying to make, right, is that is at the moment the iPad is all sorts of different things. It's this weird product that people use in different ways. So you've got people like my in-laws who use the iPad as a fast booting computer. They want to sit on the sofa and watch television and then sort of check their emails at the same time. And for that, you just need it to be small and light and convenient, and it doesn't need to have any power. And they update their iPad about every 7 years or something like that. So it's an incredibly unlucrative market for Apple to target because they never need to upgrade their iPads, and I'm not sure they ever will again because they don't need any more power than they currently have. Then you have other people that are using it as an entertainment device, and you have other people that are using it as a laptop replacement, and then you have this high-end iPad Pro mainly market that want to use it as a high-end workstation. And Apple is trying to sell to all these different markets at once, but then they have different needs, and it's not just a question of different hardware needs. It's not just a question of, or give them an M4 chip, which is insane. Just go, well, yeah, we have an M4. That's what we need. But they need to retool iPad OS. They need to make it, for that market, they need to make it closer to Mac OS. They need to make it better at multitasking and give it more power and better usage as a work device. So this person who's saying that, well, iPads should just be iPads, yeah, I mean, you're in the one category who thinks iPads should just be iPads, but you're not the only one. That's not the only interpretation of what an iPad is. And other people are saying to me, well, yes, I use it as a productivity device and it's fine for me, but that's for your needs. But other people are saying it's not enough at the moment. So the issue I was trying to highlight in my fanboy drooling way is that Apple is currently caught between not just 2 stools, but about 4 stools, and it doesn't really seem to know what it wants the iPad to be. And it could almost split the iPad into separate product lines with different software and try and appeal to people that way. I'm not sure that's the answer, because it isn't. I don't think it's even selling very many iPads at the moment for all the different audiences. But it's a bit of a mess. It was the point I was trying to make, and clearly didn't make it very well. But that is my defense, hopefully.
Well, I guess an argument can be made that Apple does differentiate and does address those particular different users because it offers different iPads. But it's not the hardware that's the problem. It's the software.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we've been saying it for a couple of years now that iPad OS, Apple needs to do something about it. And I'm not quite exactly sure what that is. I mean, I'm not sure making it closer to the Mac is the solution. Some people want to make the iPad more like a touchscreen Mac, and I'm not sure if that's really the solution.
I think that there are 2 things, right? On the software side, the iPad Pro now has an M4 chip, and no other Mac has an M4 chip. And it's like it highlights the software issue that we're talking about, because it doesn't compete with a Mac that's got an M3 chip. But maybe it's okay, because maybe for the people who use the iPad, maybe they don't need all the features of a laptop. Maybe they just want their Apple Pencil and they're illustrating something, or they're using sort of clever technology where you actually do manipulate fingers. But and like it's just the illogical sort of situation we're in, where the processor in the iPad is more powerful than, say, the MacBook Air.
Yeah.
And
I think
the
that's
software
the wrong
isn't
thing.
utilising it in the way that we would logically think it would.
Yeah. They were thinking, oh, what's wrong with the existing model? It's that it doesn't have a fast enough processor. That's not what the problem was. The problem was exactly what you're saying, is that the software ecosystem around that hardware was not making the most even of that hardware. Now they've upgraded the hardware, they've upgraded the processor, and the software is not catching up. I don't know if they're just hoping that this is one of those situations where the third-party development community just goes, oh, right, it's an M4, well, I will just flood it with this amazing software. But I don't think iPadOS itself is set up for that sort of scenario. I don't think iPadOS is it at the moment. And we've just had WWDC, so this was Apple's opportunity to show us what the iPad can be. It's given us the new hardware, and then it's all very conveniently timed. WWDC turns up, here's iPadOS 18, and what do we get? We get calculator and very little else, and you couldn't help be disappointed.
That is David, it is a pretty cool calculator, though. You got to admit that.
I mean, what's it called, Math Notes or something? That is really cool, but come on, calculators on the iPad 10 years ago. It's not.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like a productivity device. The iPad can never compete with your computer. I have a setup where I have 2 Macs, 2 screens, the screen on my laptop, keyboard, mouse. I'm using them across 2 Macs. I've got like all the things that are open that I need open. It's productive. On an iPad, oh my God, that would be so cramped, and just it wouldn't be a good experience. I would not be able to get things done. So it's not, the iPad isn't to replace that kind of way of working. The iPad is specific for particular things, like someone who's an illustrator, or someone who draws with the Apple Pencil or whatever, or it's the kids watching YouTube. But I don't know, like maybe we're just looking at it the wrong way, because it's not how we work. I use my phone for all the things that people use iPads for. I use my phone to do social media and FaceTime. My dad uses his iPad, It's...
Yeah, I think that is part of it. I think at least for me, sometimes I make the leap that I want the iPad to be more like a Mac. But the thing is, there are people who don't actually want a Mac, and they're perfectly happy with the iPad if it only had like a couple other things. And I think those couple other things involve multitasking. And I think that would basically be it. And I think a lot of people would be happy with that. The problem is Apple can't seem to fix that. They have Stage Manager, but Stage Manager isn't ideal. The people who are extremely on that high-end production, using on the high end, using the iPad Pro as a production tool, I think they want some of those limitations. It just would be better if it had a few other things, and that would be it. It doesn't have to get close to the Mac.
I think one of the problems for the iPad, and it's not something I would change, but it's too small for multitasking. Even now, you've got a 13-inch or whatever MacBook Pro. It's still, that screen's still not big enough to have too many things open in a way that you can read them. So, that you can't replace a 30-inch display.
I think it's partly because of the touchscreen. Because you could have I have a 12-inch MacBook screen, but because you're accessing things with a mouse, you can be much more accurate. But yeah, I agree, Karen. Whenever I have 2 things on the screen at once on my iPad, it's really fiddly to get to anything, and it's just a pain. It's such a pain. And the iPad is my least used Apple device. I use my iPhone all the time. I use my MacBook all the time, and the iPad it's sitting here right now looking at me, and it sits next to the MacBook, and I just have it, maybe showing some web analytics or something, showing a website or something. It's not needed. I don't really get any work done on it. I don't even use it that much for for entertainment and stuff, because my iPhone is an iPhone 15 Plus, so it has a big screen, and that's fine for that. So it's got cannibalized sort of from both sides, and particularly with, as we said, the MacBook potentially getting thinner, there's going to be even less reason to have an iPad, because it's not even going to be significantly more portable.
If Apple ever brings us a touchscreen MacBook, which I think would be a good thing, because I think kids today expect screens to be touch sensitive. I think they're going to have to accept that that's the way it's going. And once you have that, then that's yet another reason why you don't need an iPad, because it's the simplicity of just point your finger at what you want.
Well, that does it for this episode of the Macworld Podcast. Thanks to Karen Haslam.
Thank you.
Thanks to David Price.
Thank you.
And thanks to you, the audience. Thank you for tuning in. If you're interested in seeing the comments that were read on this show, you can find them in the article for this podcast on Macworld.com. You can subscribe to the Macworld Podcast in the podcast app on Spotify or through any other podcast app. Do you have any comments or questions? Send us an email at podcast@macworld.com, or contact us through X, that's @Macworld, or on Threads, that's @Macworld_HQ, or on the Macworld Facebook page. Join us in the next episode of the Macworld Podcast as we talk about the latest in the world of Apple. See you next time.